want any of the people that are close to me to have died, but I've always come out of it a much better person and found that much more richness and appreciation in life.
Hello, friends, and welcome back to the Strong Stoic Podcast. I am your host, Brandon Tumblin. Today, I have the absolute privilege of talking with Shane Trotter. Shane is a writer, he's an educator, he's a strength and conditioning coach. He recently released a book called Setting the Bar, Preparing Our Kids to Thrive in an Era of Distraction, Dependency, and Entitlement. So as you can tell, the book is about what he deems as wrong with how we're bringing up kids today, and he proposes ways in which we can actually change that and bring people, or at least allow kids the opportunity to live a very meaningful life. And so obviously this was something that I was very interested in, and we have a great talk about a lot of the modern problems we have from a practical perspective, but also from a very deep philosophical perspective. So I really enjoyed talking with Shane, and I hope you enjoy the conversation. Please welcome Shane Trotter. Shane Trotter, thanks for joining me today. How are you?
I'm doing well. It's good to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, it's my absolute pleasure to have you on. I'll introduce your book. I'll flash the camera, the book. So dear listeners, don't get too excited. So you wrote this book, and I got to say, I'm a big fan. Let me just read the title here. Setting the Bar, Preparing Our Kids to Thrive in an Era of Distraction, Dependency, and Entitlement. So I actually found out about you on Twitter. I saw you shared it, and I read that line, that preparing our kids to thrive in an era of distraction, dependency, and entitlement. And I said, okay, this guy might be worth talking to. So I read the book, love the book. Before we get into, I guess, what sort of the main premise of it is, why do you think it's important? Like, because you mentioned distraction, dependency, and entitlement in sort of this new generation, which is really like a coaching, mentoring aspect. Why do you think it's important? Why do you think like the world needs this book?
I think that most fundamentally, I think that we're seeing certainly not in every individual, but broadly a slow devolution in humanity in general, and the quality of humans and the quality of the human experience and the human life. There's not much talk anymore of what it means to live a good life or the life well lived, and you could define that in many different ways. It doesn't, I wouldn't necessarily advocate a strict, super highly moralistic view per se, but the vigor, the vitality that we see in the human life, it is decreasing. That we're seeing stark increases in anxiety and depression and meaninglessness, alienation, suicide, etc. It goes. It's really happened in lockstep with increases in comfort, which is interesting. So, and we saw the same thing. I'm a history guy. We've seen the same thing at the end of the 1800s, which prompted Theodore Roosevelt and his strenuous life concept. But the principles of living well have been pretty consistent. And we seem to, by and large, be drifting from them and wandering aimlessly. And certainly as a father, as an educator, this was very concerning to me to see just on the whole, a much less activated, engaged, admirable human.
Yeah. I think that's really cool, and it's interesting to me that in our hubris as humans, we like to think that we're so intelligent these days. We're so smart. Our science is so capable. Yet so many people now go back to the Greeks to try and understand what it really means to live a good life. And so it's such a weird thing to me when you say, okay, well, we know more now than we ever did. It's like, do we? Are we happier now than we ever were? It's sort of it's an interesting thing, because it's like, what is the most important thing in life? And like you kind of alluded to there, it's meaning. The Greeks said eudaimonia or eudaimonia, and we translate it today as happiness. I don't like using happiness. Some people say flourishing. I actually like the word you use, meaning. That's what I use. I think that's what they really meant, a life that's sort of not void of suffering, but that's able to make the suffering irrelevant in life.
Absolutely.
So, like, what do you think about that in terms of suffering? Because that seems to be what some people get hung up on. Because let's be honest, suffering isn't pleasant. It comes with challenge. It comes with everything else. But like, why do you think that is fundamentally important?
Well, because I think that the point of life, if you actually want to increase happiness, eudaimonia, meaning whatever it is, the point of life is not to, you're not going to get there by pursuing it in itself. The way to achieve that, which every great tradition has found out, is through purpose, through working towards some sort of telos. And so, so at the most fundamental level, if that's your goal, then this is the way to get there. It's not to focus on that as a goal. But also, I just find that to be I find that to be a very uninspiring goal in the first place. We have an arete. We should be pursuing arete. That excellence, and in that you find the greatest flourishing. That's where purpose happens. So it just the idea of pursuing, of avoiding suffering. If you understand the psychology of things, the hedonic treadmill, what happens is that we just kind of shift our set point, almost like, if you are moving to California for the views, that thing that you thought was going to make your life perfect, just being able to see this view every day, very, very quickly it becomes your new set point. So now you need more. They've actually shown in a lot of studies the exact opposite. So I cold plunge every morning for 5 minutes, and I meditate while I do that. And it's probably, that and exercise are like the most fundamental habits in my life, which I know if I got rid of, the quality of my life would be drastically lower. Both exercise and cold plunging, technically increase suffering in the moment. But they are short-term pains with tremendous long-term benefit. And they're able to show, actually, that if you, the research on dopamine, if you're in a high dopamine, dopamine being something that gives you pleasure, high dopamine environment, then you kind of desensitize yourself to it. But by going in these uncomfortable environments, there's kind of a post dopamine sensation. So it's the same sensation, same science as using drugs. Basically, they say no free lunch. So if you do cocaine, you're going to get really pleasurable sensation in the short term, and then it's going to be really, really hard and painful when you come out of that. It's the opposite when you cold plunge. It's unpleasurable in the short term, but really great coming out of that.
Right.
So it's kind of an inverse approach.
Yeah, I love that. I actually had, I guess last year, probably about a year ago now, I was having this bit of an argument with a fellow Stoic on what Stoicism does and what I think most philosophies do. And I made the claim that, like, fundamentally what they do is they reduce suffering. And that didn't sit well with him. And I understood why afterwards, and I did a lot of thinking about it. Because you're absolutely right. What you're doing is you're putting the suffering in the forefront. But it's weird to use the same terms to represent the same thing, because what Stoicism does is, in a sense, it reduces existential suffering, like things that are like the real deep level of suffering that you can put yourself through in life. But that's not to be confused with simple, like, pleasurable suffering or sensual suffering, because like you said, to cold plunge, to exercise, if you do that now, yeah, of course it is suffering, but it leads you into a state of being that allows the more severe type of suffering to not be existent, or at least be irrelevant. And so, yeah, it's a weird thing, and I'm still trying to figure out what the best term would be to use for these different terms, because it's like they're both suffering in a sense, but it's sort of like one is more one's going to like make you very depressed and suicidal, and one's going to make you really, really happy. So it's weird to use the same term for the same thing, but
Yeah, so I mean, I think of John Stuart Mill. He called it higher and lower pleasures. So there's higher and lower suffering. I think it kind of goes with that. And I also think of Durkheim, the realm of the profane and the realm of the sacred. It's this very consistent concept that I think everyone understands if they take a step back. But it's hard because you're fighting your most primal impulses. The route to less deep suffering and more deep happiness is not to ignore your impulses and ignore your instincts or anything. You should laugh and have joy. These natural things, but it's to not be mastered by them. So I think of Stoicism often as training, just in and of itself, just training. For life.
Yeah, that's cool. It's kind of like just what flashed to mind when you were explaining that. You reminded me of like when you're sort of playing a video game. Now, I don't play a lot of video games anymore, but like you load your you collect things to improve your health, right? A lot of kids are going to understand this reference. So you collect little rations to get your health up. But until you get to a certain point, until you get so many, it doesn't really do anything for your health, right? So you can use it, but it's not going to do anything. And that's kind of what it's like with the suffering. It's like you need to or it's kind of what it's like with this dopamine circuit when you keep going after the pleasurable things in life, the things that are really instantaneous. Like you can keep doing that, but if you hold off on that, you're going to have more overall satisfaction from whatever it is you're doing, right?
Absolutely.
So for the game nerds out there, maybe that's a good reference.
You'd be a good teacher, yes.
Oh, thank you. I thought about it quite a bit, actually. Teaching school, I loved, and that's a good point to note. I'll put it in the introduction, but yeah, you're a teacher as well. One of the things you touched on there was the importance of the physical aspect of things, right? So you mentioned exercise, cold plunges. These are very, very physical. And so I'd be interested to hear you talk a little bit about learning philosophy or learning perspective, or you could even say mental strength and resilience through the physical, and why that's so important. And I know you mentioned to me when we spoke last time that you think, especially for teenagers, and I really agree with this, that physical avenue to sort of express yourself is really important. So like why do you think as a strength coach and teacher, why do you think that physical aspect is so fundamental?
I think it's the most immediate, the most accessible to so I can read philosophy, the classics, I can read constantly, I love to read, and I can get a ton out of this. But I've trained my mind for a lot of years to be able to do that. So much of this stuff, I read, the Odyssey, say, when I was in high school, and it didn't hit the same way, right? So a lot of the intellectual depth that you can get is only possible through maturity, I think. Where the physical is very accessible. It's a great microcosm of life. I know everyone's heard that a billion times, and everyone who's played athletics, but it really is. It's a great way to pull youth in, because they all I think we all naturally yearn for these things. We naturally yearn to see ourselves develop, and so the results can be pretty immediate, not super immediate like anything. There's delayed gratification, but we can see very tangible, real physical results that serve as a great gateway in to understanding big concepts. You train, you go through a little bit of suffering, whatever it is, and then you see yourself. You can go further. Your endurance improves. You can lift more. Your strength improves. These are very basic lessons. Into the middle, when you start to see a competitive athlete, there's so much learning you can do. So I had a anxiety disorder, and that I worked through a couple ways, but the most powerful way I got through it was meditation. I've learned a ton through meditation, and And those lessons, you just talk to a high schooler about meditation, they won't be interested. But you talk to them about, okay, so here's what happened. You threw a bad pitch. You got tight. You started thinking in your head and overanalyzing your pitch, and then you lost control the whole night. You let one bad pitch really wreak havoc, and then so it was the mental conversation. So now we're talking about meditation, but they don't realize we're talking about meditation. We're talking about learning to not listen, not engage the thoughts, stay focused on your performance key, whatever that is, which is analogous to the breath. So the physical is just competition, physical training. These are just such great insights into training the mind.
Yeah, I love that because I relate to that so much because when I was a kid, when I was a teenager, I had so much energy, so much masculine energy. Very driven. I'm still very driven, but I think about this a lot. I don't think I could have really been at peace unless I had that physical avenue. Like I really don't think I could, and I've thought about it quite a bit. And even to this day, like it's not as pronounced, but if I go too long without exercise, like I just feel this barbarian sort of brewing up inside me. So, and it's almost like this Carl Jung idea of like a vice that's just, he would say evil, but a vice that's just so pronounced that sometimes you just need an avenue through which to channel it, right? I think it's very important with kids. And the really cool thing about it, it's like you said, you can explain concepts to people, like you, and I'm sure you have this conversation so many times with kids. You say, listen, if you just put in a little bit of work every day, you're going to see improvement. And they go, yeah, I know. And you say, no. Like,
sure.
If you put in a little bit of work every day, you'll see improvement. Yeah, I know. But until they actually put in that little bit of work and then see the improvement, yeah, they know, but they don't really understand. And so the physical side sort of gives you an avenue, exactly like you said, to sort of see measurable progress where they actually understand, oh, if I put in a little bit of work every day, I will. So it's a huge difference between actually explaining something and teaching them through action. I think you hit the nail on the head with that.
Yeah, it goes from having faith in what you're saying, it's a bland proverb to them until they've experienced it, and then they have a story to it. They want to tell everyone. Everyone's interested in their own progress,
Right. Yeah. No, that's awesome, man. And I guess on that sort of, we're talking about barbarian virtues. All right, I brought up the barbarian virtues, and you have a line. I can't remember exactly what it is. Something. It's a quote from someone. I don't know if you remember it. Who said that? It was
Theodore Roosevelt.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm sure I can get it in 2 seconds because unless we keep the barbarian virtues, gaining the civilized ones will be of little avail. Which really kind of highlights what we're trying to say here. If you don't have toughness, if you don't have courage, if you don't have these things, it's very difficult to really get to. Winston Churchill had a similar quote, which was, "Courage is the first virtue because it guarantees all the others, because it's the only one that is basically a prerequisite for all the others." And it's so true. I have one of my best friends is a skateboarder, and he talks about the drop. So he works a lot of skateboarding camps and everything, and he can see in skateboarders, one of the most profound moments of their life is when they finally learn to drop in on a half pipe, because you have to commit. Where everyone can't drop in is when they're not committing with their body. You have to basically get perpendicular to the ramp because it's a straight drop and your body is straight down. It's the only way to go. If you lean back, the board scoots out from under you. So it's this huge moment of courage that is this profound moment in their life that shows them that they can overcome, this intense fear, and by doing that, they're capable of this whole world that wasn't accessible to them before. And so I think that's something we see over and over again. I feel like you were starting to say something.
No, you go ahead, man. No, this is great.
But at the beginning of the book, I make a case that we often look at modernity, and we kind of think that humans are better than they've ever been. That we're so much more woke, and we're so much more progressive, enlightened. But all of these things, I think you can take all the good of the progress we've made and keep it, while recognizing that we're less courageous, we're less physically physically cultivated, in worse physical shape. We are less inclined to community contribution. All these other things we've decreased. So we could maintain the progress we've made while increasing these other virtues. And most of the virtues that we have today, I would argue, require nothing more than a like button. Mm-hmm. It's just holding the progressive view. It's holding the right opinion, and there's power in that. If it's certainly powerful that we are open, empathetic, loving, and not harmful to homosexuals. That is a good belief to hold. That is socially productive. So sure, but it really does. It's not. You don't get to pat yourself on the back. You were born in an era where we understood this. Just like you don't get to pat yourself on the back because you realize slavery is wrong. Well, you were born in an era where we understood this. What you can pat yourself on the back for is contributing to your society, is building courage, is training your body, is training your mind. So the virtues that I think are most fundamental are often left undone, and so I think that kind of goes in line with the barbarian virtues concept.
Well, there's nothing less virtuous than virtue signaling, right? The Stoics were so against virtue signaling. All the ancient Stoics would talk about this. That listen, like if you're gonna do something, don't do it so that people see it. That doesn't mean you don't do it where people can see it, but it's all about the intention behind the act. Why are you doing that? Why are you hitting that like button or that share button? Like what's the real intention behind that? And for most people, it's fundamentally, I think, to fit in, to feel good. And it's this source of I've been there, because I'm a millennial. I've been there. I've been the guy, you share stuff and then you feel good about yourself. Oh, I did something. And then every like you get, oh, look, that person's nice too. We're all so virtuous. It's like, what, sure. What the hell is that? That's virtue signaling. Sure. It's like, why am I doing that? I'm doing that to feel pleasure in this moment because I want to feel good about myself. Have I done anything worth feeling good about? Probably not. So it's a big problem today. And like you said, it's easy. It's easy to virtue signal. It's easier than it's ever been.
Absolutely. Yeah, so if you look at, to some degree, you have to make peace with the fact that, so you love young, and that everyone's not going to have, altruistic motives all the time. And that you can't set yourself up, I can't expect high schoolers. We learn virtue, we learn morality in our youth, and you have to make peace with the fact that they are going to pursue status in one way or another at that age. You don't really get to the point where you're past status seeking until you're past high school. They're just obsessed with status at this age. So that's what's concerning to me, is that status is easy now. It just means hitting the like button on the right thing. It just means having the right opinion, which makes it really hard to be courageous and have a nuanced opinion about anything. But when your culture is aligned around the four Stoic virtues, or those are hard. Status comes with it's really hard to earn status, and that's how it should be. It's really hard. It takes a real courage to earn status. If a society has rites of passage, and status is earned by completing these rites of passage that show ability to contribute to society and a high level of competence, well, that's a good thing. Status is hard to achieve, and it should be.
Yeah. Yeah, it's talking about the virtues there. Because the Stoics would say again that the intention is so important behind the act. And one of the things I caught myself doing as I was sort of transitioning towards this, and maybe this is a necessary step, but first you do blatant virtue signaling. You don't really realize what it is, but then you do something that's more subtle. You do subtle virtue signaling, which is, okay, I'm going to do this nice thing, and maybe if I do it enough, someone will notice. It's like, to the Stoics, no, that's just as bad, because you're still doing it on some level, on a way that's requiring everyone to sort of look at you. That's your real intention behind the matter. And so it's very important. This is something I've been really working on in the past couple of years, is minding my intentions. Like, really minding my intentions. Why am I saying this? Why am I responding this way? Why am I doing this action? And if my intentions aren't pure, that's something that you have to work on. I don't know if you had a comment about that.
No, I absolutely agree. And I think that when you're pursuing a virtue, for, kind of the subtle, hopefully they'll notice, it still makes it less likely that, so the courageous thing is the Stanley Milgram, would you say, no, I'm not going to keep doing these electrical shocks. I'm here in a private setting. It's me and this authority figure, and this is really hard for me to step up and say, no, let's shut this down. Mm-hmm. And you're still not building the capacity to have that moral courage in that scenario, if that makes sense. So because you're still so obsessed on, so you're reinforcing this obsession on other people's approval, which is making it less likely that you'll have the moral courage in the situations where you're going to need it.
Yeah.
And again, Stoicism is so often about training.
No, I love that, man. That's very well said. I want to play devil's advocate a little bit to the barbarian virtues and the strength. Why, in times like we're living in right now, of comfort, of quote, quote, peace, of everyone being kind and everyone's so nice and we're all virtuous, blah, 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 why do you think strength and fortitude is still needed?
I could write a book on that. To start, I would go just with, you have to, so Stoics are very big on bringing yourself in harmony with nature, with the natural order. And I think that most fundamentally, we have to recognize that human evolution is super slow. We're not evolving to these rapid changes around us. We are fundamentally still a hunter-gatherer. We fundamentally still have hunter-gatherer needs, and our deepest needs are fundamentally still formed from that hunter-gatherer environment. So regardless of how comfortable the world gets, we have to meet those needs. We have to orient our lives around the needs formed in that environment. So we're still going to need, even if somehow we're able to create the utopia where everything is provided for us. We don't need human competency. We don't need physical fitness. We don't need physical vigor. Humanity will not be activated. We will not live good lives if we don't start with these fundamental pieces. I think that's just really undeniable. And then to take it a step further, I think utopia is a delusion. So the idea that we are going to get to this point where we don't need human capacity is very misguided. As you do that, you seed things. So, for example, a barbarian virtue, safety, is deified in the modern world. We deify safety. It's kind of a trump card. Someone says, well, this makes you safer, and boom, we consider it progress, and that's the end of the story. Well, a barbarian virtue is courage, which means taking on risk. So how do you mediate those two? If we don't ever challenge, so safety is a good thing to an extent. I don't believe in, in Aristotle, I think called courage the mean between between recklessness and cowardice, right? So I don't believe in recklessness for sure, but we have to be able to challenge these ideas such as safety, and not make them everything. No virtue can be everything. So, for example, Why We Drive, Matthew Crawford makes this brilliant case for what the cost would be of giving up our agency to travel, of giving up driving to self-driving cars. And there's really no way of having a world where humans and self-driving cars coexist. It's like if we're going to do self-driving cars, we're going to not be drivers. And this is one of the last realms where we require humans to have a standard level of competency. And we put humans out in mass where they have to negotiate with each other. They have to be intuitive to subtleties that can't be programmed, with binary code with ones and zeros. Where we have to be totally activated, switched on humans, and that's really a wonderful thing. It's something that we should want for any society, to have levels of competency where we depend on each other to have a level of competency. That dance is essential. And so when you get rid of that, you just see the devolution, and you see another step towards the devolution of humanity. We could, without getting too political, we could certainly see the same things happening in the COVID case today, where on one hand you could say, it's to stay safer, we have to stay in our bubbles. Well, I can tell you from my experience what I've seen that this mentality did to our students. They took 3 months off, many of them a year and 3 months off of school. We thought that we could do the safe thing and have them learn virtually. Safety was the primary value that we were focusing on, at the expense of kids and the human connection they need, and the freedom they need to move and have these free-flowing relationships. So when there's no value to compete with safety, we see human devolution every time.
That is something too that I'm very concerned with, is the developmental loss that we're putting kids through the COVID, through isolation. Like we're not understanding the importance of that, and I probably don't understand the importance of it as much as like a behavior psychologist would. But I've studied these things at least enough to be aware the importance of things like physical play, the importance of being able to see people's smiles and faces and cues, and this is important. And it's weird now, because even me as an adult, it's weird if you don't have that. Because if I see someone at the store and I don't know, you grab the last jar of pickles, and normally you'd give them the smile and you'd say sorry or whatever, but now it's like you kind of got to squint your eyes to let them know that you're adjusting your behavior a little bit to sort of let them know, but it just still doesn't feel right. It feels like there's this literal mask between us, and as a child that's trying to develop those skills, I can't imagine the repercussions that we'll have to deal with later in their adult life.
Yeah, and I have a 4-year-old, almost 5, and a 3-year-old, and it's undeniable that learning is completely physical for them. I mean, they touch everything; they have to. Yeah. And I don't know that stops at age 10 or even age 13. I think that too much of modernity, we put a lot of stock in words and what words say, without focusing enough on experience and the wisdom conveyed only through experience. And we're really shutting so much of that down, as if we can just duplicate the educational experience by putting it on a screen. And as if we don't have all the other challenges that were already going on, the distraction by the social media and the phone and everything else that could go on there. It was very naive to think that we could do anything even approximating education online, particularly with a high school environment. And we weren't thinking about the social needs or any of that. So I think that was very naive. And again, safety. This is I hope it doesn't come off as harsh, but for generations and generations, we see this in World War II and Korea and Vietnam, there's this fundamental understanding in society that we are willing to send 18-year-old young men, people with their whole lives ahead of them, into war on behalf of higher virtues that we have all agreed on are worth it. And today we're not willing to sacrifice what is typically an elderly population on behalf of the well-being of the young, which is I think startling when you put it in those in that way. I think when you think of it in that way, everyone would agree. Well, but you have to do what's right for the young. But the problem is we have a tendency to think that we can have it all. That the modernity has convinced us we should be able to always have our cake and eat it too. That so the cost benefit equation rarely goes through people's mind, and that comes back to entitlement, to not understanding how unique it is to live in a republic in the modern world, to live in a democracy. How unique this moment is. How unique the high level of of living that we have. The high level of social cooperation we have is, particularly with the amount of citizens we have in this country. It's staggering, and because we don't understand history, we take these things for granted. We take a lot of the cost-benefit analysis for granted.
Well, and
we should just have it all.
And some of it too it seems to stem from this idea that we can't judge each other. There's no better or worse ways of living. Wrong. There are
Yes.
better and worse ways of living. There are better and worse systems, and this sort of manifests itself today as well, which sort of speaks to the importance of strength and barbarian virtues in a sense. Is that people say, well, violence is always, you always want to avoid violence. It's like, okay, do you think we could have avoided violence in World War II? And God, I did an episode on this, and I got pretty emotional about it, because it was like, here you have countries in the West who believed in their values so much that, like you said, they were willing to send 18-year-olds, and 18-year-olds were willing to go. And why did they do that? They did it because they thought that a state not run by fascists was worth suffering for. So you mean to tell me that violence is always the wrong decision? I'm not saying I don't condone violence. I don't think we should all go out and start a war. But at the end of the day, if there's values and virtues that you fundamentally believe are good, and you better damn well fundamentally believe something is good, well, what are you going to do if someone is coming over and wants to destroy your world? And how are you going to be able to even defend yourself if you don't have strength and fortitude?
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely. And I would go a step further to say that, I think part of I spent the weekend with my father-in-law and his best friend. I took my son. It was kind of a guy's weekend, and I'm listening to them tell all these stories from high school. And one of the things that comes up is there used to be a lot more fights. We got in fights just kind of as a mark of life, which strikes me as very, very typical of the early Roman culture as well. As a competition culture. It stemmed from there's a culture of honor, and we see this in most honor cultures. And I don't think an unmitigated honor culture is a good thing. I go through this in the book a little bit. I think a balance between a dignity culture and an honor culture is kind of the sweet spot. Yet there are these undeniable developmental progressions that go on in these young men because they had to handle their own issues. And they talked over and over again about how it wasn't a big deal. We didn't take it too far. It was such a common thing that you would have a fight, and then you would laugh about it. You become best friends with the guys days later. And it would be this source of kind of kinsmanship going on afterward. I think I know that can be taken too far. And in fact, the fights we see today, there tends to be way less fighting. But when there are fights, there are these brutally vicious fights that go way too far. And it strikes me as very as what you get in modernity. You try to eliminate something, and you basically get far less of it. But when you get it in far more extreme amounts.
Yeah.
Rather than letting the natural, rather than accepting natural human behavior to some degree.
Well, when a microaggression becomes attached to an aggression, that's what you start to have. You start to have this binary system where it's either a 0 or a 1. You're either on our side or you're not. You're either virtuous or you're not. You're either sharing this Facebook post or you're my enemy. It's sort of this mentality. And what you're talking about there is bonding through conflict. And this is very important because I work in a very male-dominated field because I work with boats quite a bit, predominantly men, and I see this all the time. And I'm not saying this is ideal or anything like that, but what seems to be the case is that when you have men particularly, and they have a conflict, like they're very open about it, and they get heated about it, but they actually bond through it. And this is a key point that we're missing. It's like, yes, it's uncomfortable. No one likes. Well, some people like conflict. I've seen people who like conflict, but people always think about conflict as a bad thing. It's like, no, not necessarily. I see it, and I've done it myself. I've bonded through people with conflict, and through conflict, through the resolution of it. Again, given that it doesn't go to the extreme, it can be a very beneficial way of bonding and knowing your own limits and knowing your own strengths and knowing your own weaknesses and knowing other people's strengths and weaknesses as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, self-knowledge so much self-knowledge comes to this. And so it's this is when you're out in the world, you get to test virtues. So much of modernity, we never know if we're courageous. We never know if we're wise. We're never put in that position where we have to make judgments. We never know if I guess we have plenty of room to practice temperance, but for the most part, we're untested. We're not living. So it reminds me of I'm forgetting the Nietzsche quote, but basically, I laugh at these people who consider themselves virtuous because they have no claws. We're put in these situations where we're not experiencing life, so we can pat ourselves on the back, but we're not living. And the other thing that stands out to me from what you said is just how important camaraderie is, connection is. Morality, if you go to Jonathan Haidt, I'm a huge Jonathan Haidt fan. Righteous Mind is one of the best books I've ever read. And morality really is more than anything, it's a means of creating deep connection. It's a means of bonding people. And what you get when you get this morally relativistic society where anyone can do anything as long as you kind of everyone respects the one virtue that matters, which is being kind and fair. What you get there is that no one really bonds over anything because there's nothing to bond over. There's nothing. It's just like, oh, he's fine. You can live that way. You can live this way. You can live this way, and so no one cares about anything. Care comes from investing, from believing in something bigger than yourself, and from experience in the real world. Yeah. So I don't know if that was clear.
Yeah, no, I get it. No, I agree, man. As an extension to that, though, I want to ask you. I sort of had this idea when I was reading your book, and you make the case that in many ways we're coddling the younger generation. We're not giving them enough challenges. We're not putting them in situations to grow. And I've thought about that in terms of Stoicism, because you can take the primary maxim of Stoicism, which is live according to nature, and you can really break that down into three things. You can say you have to live according to your own individual personal nature, which includes things like your personality type. You have to live in nature in terms of human nature, which is the shared aspect of humanity, the things that we all have to face, such as mortality, death, and our relationship to each other. And then you have to be aligned with nature herself, which is reality. And it's crazy to me because this echoes what I spoke with Dr. Jeremy Sherman. He studied origins of life, and he actually made the case that organisms must fit three environments, and they echoed those three environments. It was you have to be comfortable in your own skin, you have to be comfortable in relationship to everyone else in humanity, and you have to be in line with reality itself. Because if you're not in line with truth, like Jordan Peterson said, he made the claim that you can only bend truth so much before it snaps back, and you're going to feel it when it snaps back. So yeah. I guess my question, where I'm going with this is, do you think those three environments we have, we're only really focusing on bringing up our kids to make them comfortable in their own skin, yet we're sort of ignoring mostly reality itself and the fact that that's going to eventually catch up with you, and then maybe to a slightly lesser degree, we're also ignoring how that relates to everyone else around you and how you have a harmonious relationship with humanity. Is that clear? Does that make sense?
Very clear. I loved this structure. I wrote it down as you were talking because I think it's brilliantly put. I would make the case that you're exactly right, but I would go further. I'd say if you start with personal nature, we're putting all our stock in the self-esteem movement into self-esteem and individual. We've hyper-individualized society and gone far away from this sense of being a part of a community that's bigger than ourselves. But having said that, I think that in eradicating that second prong, the human nature, society, the broader society element, we've crippled our capacity to get very far into understanding our personal nature. Self-esteem is very shallow. How did you really get to know yourself throughout most of civilization? It's by overcoming challenges, by working on behalf of missions that were bigger than yourself, through rites of passage. So when a community is strong, it has rites of passage, it has rituals, it has these landmark events that help people understand how to progress towards adulthood and who they are, and give them these experiences where they really get to know themselves. So, the listener can think back, what are the fundamental events in my life where I've really gotten to know myself? Maybe it was, this sports team, the two-a-days, this X, Y, and Z. I really had to realize a different level of persistence in myself. I saw I could, push past my mental barriers. I experienced camaraderie on a level I wouldn't have known possible, and it was only possible after that initial commitment. Maybe it was, that 5-day backpacking trip whatever it is, we tend to have these giant leaps and challenges where we really get to know ourselves. I know I made tremendous giant leaps in the process of overcoming my anxiety disorder, Puro. And so that is crippled. That capacity to know yourself tends to be crippled in a hyper-individualized society. And certainly the capacity to understand the natural order is crippled. So I would fundamentally agree, but just take it even further.
Yeah, man. No, I love that. And it's cool too because, and actually Jordan Peterson, one of his rules for life was compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not who someone else is today. And I think it's important to dig into that a little bit because, and he's clarified this separately, but the reason you do that is because you are the best comparison for yourself, because nobody else has lived the life you have. No one else has the experiences. No one else has your same genetics or personality type. And so comparing yourself to who you were yesterday is the best thing because it allows you it gives you a perfect reference point, literally a perfect reference point, because it gives you a place to say, okay, am I better than I was yesterday? At the same time, that doesn't mean that you completely disregard your relationship to everyone else in the world. That doesn't mean you don't compare yourself ever to anyone else. It's just that you have to, fundamentally, happiness comes when you see yourself moving towards a goal. And so when Peterson's talking about that point, he's saying it because that's how you are deeply fulfilled in life. It's by improving on things and getting better. But it's like you made the point there. How you relate and how you fit in with the rest of society is very, very fundamentally important as well. And it's blatantly obvious because if you never compare yourself to other people, how are you going to go into any social environment and be able to properly judge where you are? And you do this all the time. Everybody does this. If you really watch yourself, whenever you go into a new environment, you'll see yourself doing that. You start comparing yourself. Okay, well, how do I fit in here? What's my role in relationship to everyone else? It's just so psychologically deep. So yeah, I think that's fascinating, because I do agree with Peterson on that, but that's not a blind faith. There's presuppositions built into that, comparing yourself to who you were yesterday, that are really important, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we make sense of who we are in comparison to others.
Yeah.
It's like you expressed. It's on a very subtle level. It happens quite naturally in every situation we're in. And if you moved yourself into an entirely different context, entirely different culture, the growth that you were asking of yourself would be entirely different.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, what do you think of objective measures of strength? This is what I was thinking about in terms of, like what's the importance of objective measures of strength? Because you can say there is this element of, like you say, relativity, right? Am I stronger than everyone else? But then there's also things that are just true. And this is something, and I'll give you an example so it's a bit more clear, because I know this is really abstract, but in the gym, there's objective measurements of strength. There's objective, can you squat 1 plate? Can you squat 2 plates? That's to me what's so appealing about strength training, is because it's so objective. You can go into the gym and you can feel great, but if you're relatively weaker than you were 2 months ago, objectively, you are not as strong as you think you are. Exactly, objectively. Now, it's not to say that the subjective experience is irrelevant or unimportant, but there is a certain element, or there is certainly importance to objective levels of strength. And in some ways, maybe you would agree or disagree, that's what you're trying to do with a kid. You're trying to get them to a certain level of competence. Objectively, like they got to be able to, let's talk practically, they got to be able to do their laundry, they got to be able to cook their own meals, they got to be able to clean the dishes, these sort of base levels. So I don't know, is that ringing anything for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it is hard to clarify these metrics. So I'm a big believer in that there is truth you can pursue, but you can't codify it. You can't. So, for example, they've got to be able to hit these objective levels. What they are per se, it's hard to quantify, and what you measure matters. So, for example, to go back to your strength analogy, you may have gone down slightly in your bench and back squat, but you're a better football player because you have increased your mobility. You know how to use your body as one piece better. You can get better leverage, etc. You have better lateral mobility. You move better in space. So you often see most athletes will talk about the farm strong guy, the guy who grew up on a farm and he came to the weight room and he couldn't bench 225. And this is a Division I program, but boy, he kicked my butt on the football field. So you hear this often. So I think that is the risk in any time that you try to gamify life. You try to say these metrics are what matter. We're going to make them all that matter, versus pursuing what I like to think of as a well-rounded sense of arete. The highest excellence that considers all things. Highest quality strength for use, or however you'd want to term that. But yes, there are probably an almost infinite number of excellences that we have to develop at a high level to become an adult, and we should expect of our young adults. The ability to wash the dishes, wash their clothes, make a meal. More than that, to get lost in a city and be able to to survive, to be able to figure it out, to be broke and figure out what to do next when you don't know what to do next, when there's no answer on Google, to be in a disagreement with someone you're in a relationship with, and not blow it up because of the first emotions you feel, where you feel trapped and you just, all your emotions are saying, this is BS, blah, 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 blah. To be able to check your emotion, to steady yourself, to get through, weather that storm. These are all excellences that are part of becoming a real adult. So I agree. I think there is, I think there's nuance to the message. There is an objective level you need to hit, and yet there's no way of quantifying that level, and that's what makes life hard, challenging, fun. But it's why the social constructivists, the people who think they're gonna map out the world perfectly, are doomed to fail. Because life is just too complex for that.
Yeah, and I would argue that that's what you try and do at the end of your book. You try and provide, like, here's a base level of competency that kids require. Mostly focus on knowledge, but obviously you talk about so many other things in the book as well. That's really important. Maybe we've come off a bit hard, let's say, through most of the episode. So I want to talk as an extension of that, actually, about, dare I say it, love. So I've been thinking a lot about this, and the guests that come on my podcast normally have to talk to me about the things that I'm trying to figure out at the time. So this is one of those things. But I've been thinking about this concept of love and what it really means, because I feel like we don't really understand it today, and it sort of goes with this coddling thing. Because what I think when we think about love is we think more like. And let me explain what that means. Like, if you have a crazy uncle and he comes over and he likes the kids, he's giving them candy, he's staying up all night with them, he's playing video games with them, he likes them. But the parent will be the one that says, okay, have a little bit of candy, not too much, let's go to bed at a decent hour, you can stay up a little bit late, your uncle's here. The difference between those approaches is that the parent loves the child and the uncle likes the child, at least in the way that they are acting. And so I've been thinking about what that really means. And I think what it means, when you say you love someone, or you say you love your child, or you could even say you love yourself, really what you're saying is, I want the best for you. And the best for you does not necessarily mean that you get everything you want right now. And that's Absolutely. What you say to your kids, but it's also what you say to yourself. If you really love yourself, you're not going to give yourself everything you want right now. You're going to delay gratification. It's also what you do to your partner. You don't give them everything they want. You give them what they need, so to speak. So obviously as a teacher, as a father, as a husband, as a member in your community, like, what do you think about that idea, that, like, love and what it really means?
Yeah, and I think that's a fundamentally mature understanding, and I would completely agree with that. And if there's anything that we as a society are failing in, it is having the maturity to love, to love our children and know what's best for them. To go back just a hair, you mentioned that we could have come off as too harsh, and I agree. And I think I make these concessions often in my book, where I try to always point to the opposite extreme. Where I think that we've fallen towards one extreme, but I don't want my book to be taken to justify the other extreme, which is harshness for the sake of harshness, usually because the person being harsh wants to pat their own back and show how tough they were because they're being a jerk. We've all seen this. The get off my lawn, I know best, and it's really just this tremendous ego that has to show everyone that they're a hard, tough man. I'm not a fan of that either. So I appreciate you noting that. But yeah, real love has to come with wisdom. And wisdom is recognizing that for me to really love you, I know that you will be happiest if you are capable, if you feel an actual sense of confidence in challenging moments, if you feel empowered to go on and tackle challenges, if you feel competent, if you feel like you actually admire the person you see in the mirror, that it's not this phony self-esteem, but you actually admire yourself. If you have habits that make it easy for you to be healthy versus constantly feeling like you're depriving yourself. There's so much that goes into a good life. And the typical patterns that we're seeing, they're hardwiring our youth to live shallow, unfulfilling lives. And so that's not real love when we allow that. Real, like you said, real love it requires wisdom. Now, so my family's healthy. We eat, lean protein, vegetables, every dinner. We also, I don't know if people know what crumble is, but shoot, I love a crumble cookie. And we'll go get crumble cookie. Nice. It's not like it's this harsh boxed off worldview. You can love and still give them these things, but it has the wisdom to put all these things in balance. And that is so often what you're right. What is lacking is the wisdom to know what is needed for a good life. Overprotection is another. We protect from every minor bump, bruise. We make kids think they need to be coddled when anything happens, and they don't develop the confidence to know that they can persist. Or we handle every minor disagreement between them and another kid, and they don't develop the social skills. Real love is recognizing that they have to be able to stand on their own 2 feet to navigate their own pains, and to be able to do so in a way that is. I think of the Seneca quote: "I judge you fortunate." I judge you unfortunate because you have never lived through adversity. No one can know what you're capable of, not even you. And that is, to me, the worst thing that we could ever do to our children is to not give them the capacity to face adversity and grow more powerful from it. Because that's where the greatest joy of life is going to come from. So yeah, I completely agree with your concept of love.
Yeah, it's so true, man. It's like I love that quote of Seneca's. I really do. It's like, and it's true. It's like what would be the ideal scenario? You get to the end of your life, you're looking back. You're probably going to look back at the things that you've accomplished for the good, right? And it's like unless, like, what do you think, that's going to come for free? You think it's going to come without any challenge?
Yeah.
That's not how it works, right? So I love that, man. I love that quote. And then I guess, sort of as a little segue to that, it's sort of making me think about the other end of it, which is the importance of the bad things in life, which a lot of people quite understandably want to avoid. And there's this, so we talk about love and all these wonderful feelings, but then there's like the bad. I hesitate to say bad because stoically, I guess they wouldn't be bad, but the emotions that are unpleasant, let's say, such as heartbreak. So, and I saw Mike Tyson talk about this a little bit, and he made the case that, like, if you think life is beautiful, you have to think that all life is beautiful. And this is very Stoic as well. He said you have to think that death is beautiful. You have to think that losing things is beautiful. All the negative aspects of life becomes beautiful in and of itself as well. And so the song lyric that really stands out to me is he's talking about heartbreak, and he actually says, see if I can remember, the light will draw you in, the night will bring you down, or the dark will bring you down, the night will break your heart, but only if you're lucky now. And that lyric, it always boggled me for so long. So I'm thinking to myself, how can you say that heartbreak is a good thing? Like, how can you say that you're lucky to have your heart broke? And I thought that right up until I actually had my heart broke. And then I realized, okay, there's something to that. Just because something that we deem negative, like heartbreak, no one wants to go through heartbreak. But if you think about the things that you've been able to consider post heartbreak, or even the simple fact that you were heartbroken means that you've experienced love, that you've experienced something that's worth breaking your heart over. Sort of these really deep philosophical things that took me personally a very long time to understand. But like, what do you think about that? Like, really, I guess, in broadly speaking, the pain that's associated with the good parts in life.
Well, yeah, you're making me think on. It's. I really love that. It makes me think a lot. I'd rather be fully alive than numb. So this draws me into what I'm seeing today broadly. You don't invest, you can't have your heart broken, and that's safe. But you also, you lose the opportunity to feel the greatest joys there are. B, you don't grow from it, which shuts you off more from those joys. But even so, it's a trope. It's better to have loved and lost than to never have loved at all.
Yeah.
I mean, you think about how there are certainly high school sweethearts that they met their special someone and they're together forever. But most people are only good in their marriage or their relationship. They're so much better because those heartbreaks or that heartbreak they had. It gives them a higher level, a higher capacity in their relationship. More than that, it gives them a greater. I think that humans should be rooted in a community. I think that if there's anything that's killing humans today, is that we're trying to be global citizens who are super, super engaged with everything about the entire globe, and yet we have no connections locally. We don't follow local politics. We're not rooted in a community. We're not going to community organizations. And so when you are rooted in a community, you've experienced heartbreak. You get to feel the amazing power of real friendship and those people who are there for you. And then you have that capacity to really be there and understand someone else when they're going through that heartbreak themselves. And you get this richer view of the world, of what life is itself. So not only do you have greater capacity in your future relationships, but you have access to these other amazing things about life. Feeling heartbreak is painful as hell, but it's a hell of a lot better than feeling nothing. I mean, you want to look at what drives people to suicide. It's not the absence, or it's not feeling really hard emotions. It's the absence of emotion. It's the blah. It's the meaninglessness. It's the what's the point. Heartbreak is real and is painful, but it's beautiful too.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I would fall there, I guess.
Nah, well said, man. I couldn't agree more. It's you think we think of it as bad, but it's like you said, there's a beauty. There's a beauty in that. There's a real beauty in that, and I think until you really experience that, it's hard to understand. Experienced it and processed it properly, because the processing
Sure.
of that is really important too.
Well, it's similar to death.
Yeah.
And so you look at another thing that's tough about modernity is we've kind of insulated ourselves so much from death.
Right.
We don't realize, people are shocked when the first people they're close to die. They feel like it's unfair. It shouldn't have happened. But I feel like the greatest, I don't want any of the people that are close to me to have died, but I've always come out of it a much better person.
Yeah.
And found that much more richness and appreciation in life. These are just, we can't hide from the world. We can't hide from reality.
Yeah.
And we can't hide from our own death. And so I think that's important to process as well.
Yeah, it's I speak, I try and meet a lot of people now, and I mention, in Stoicism, obviously, death meditation is a key practice, and it comes up in conversation every now and then. And for most people, that's just the weirdest thing. They just like, what do you mean? What do you mean you think about dying? I said, no, it's not like I'm depressed sitting in a room thinking about dying. I'm thinking, it's 7 a.m. I got to get up and do a lot of work, or I could stay in bed for an hour and a half. I'm going to die someday. Let's get my ass out of bed because I'm not going to be here forever. Or it's, I haven't seen my family in 2 years. So over Christmas there, I saw my family. We're all going to be dead someday. Who knows? Maybe I'll go away. I'll go to work for a year, won't see them in a year, and maybe one of them will get hit by a car. Like, you never know. So it's a way to appreciate the things in life while you're here, to be present in the moment. And it kind of gets down to taking something that seems horrible, like death, seems horrible, and bringing it to the present and using it to be present, using it to be a good person. And that's cool, man. It's interesting that you say through death of people around you, it actually can make you a better person. And that's really the Stoic response to it. It's like, what are you going to do? The alternative is either going numb or making you a worse person. And I mean,
yeah,
I know what I choose, right?
Absolutely. Well, and to go back to what you're saying, I don't think a lot of people spend a lot of time thinking about death. And it's not like I, sit down for 30 minutes a day and do. I certainly don't. But if you lived forever, there'd be less reason to get your butt going today. There'd be less, you'd have infinity to check out all these things. It's what makes your choices matter. The fact that you have to choose how you're going to spend your life. And when you don't have that there in the forefront of your mind, then your choices don't matter near as much. Each day doesn't matter near as much. I often, somewhat, I'm not a minimalist. I don't really have that option.
Being a father.
Well, yeah, and given the family around me and everything like that, I'd really shun myself. But to some degree, I'm fairly critical of consumerism in the consumerist mindset that seems to have infected modernity. I'm very critical of it, and I often try to explain this to people. I don't like my kids getting too many presents. I don't like this because you can see it in their eyes. They're just more. Each one isn't really, there's no real appreciation. They're just looking for more. And I don't like seeing that. And to some degree, that's very natural. But the way I explain it to people often is, hey, if they get one present, boy, that matters. If you give them 12, each present after that is that much less valuable. Each present after the first is that much less valuable. And I think it's the same, if you have infinity, well, each day is that much less valuable. Each choice is that much less valuable. I don't know if that makes sense, but.
No, man, that's beautiful. I think that's a great spot to wrap things up. Hey, thank you so much for talking with me. I had a blast. I appreciate your book. I appreciate your efforts. And as a Stoic, I appreciate your character, which is the most important thing in my mind. So thank you so much for coming on. And where can people find you? So the book, I'll post it, Setting the Bar again. Setting the Bar, Preparing Our Kids to Thrive in an Era of Distraction, Dependency, and Entitlement. Where can people find you personally, or on your social media, or where are you?
Thank you, Brandon. It was awesome getting to talk. You can find me at easiest way is trottershane.com. Through that website, there's a way to get straight to my email that I check daily. I'm also on Twitter and at trottershane or at trotterwrites. But I'm not on Twitter. You can get to my Twitter through my website, and I'm not on Twitter every day. So the best way and the way I prefer to talk to people is through email.
Perfect. Thanks again so much.
Thank you, Brandon.
Until next time. Bye, everyone.